Billy Goodnick. I'm a landscape architect, educator, author, drummer, and live in Santa Barbara, California. A couple of things came together that led me to really falling in love with bonsai, and had the privilege of studying with John Naka, who was one of the American masters, while landing a job at a bonsai nursery in West Los Angeles. And at the time I was a full-time musician and starting to get sort of fall out of love with music, and said I need to find something else to do. And I loved the bonsai. I started messing around with house plants and figured I'd go back to school, get an associate's degree in ornamental horticulture, and that kind of started it. From a horticulture degree, I ended up doing retail nursery sales, worked for some landscape contractors, did installation, did maintenance, but really had a passion for design right from the start. And I realized after years working in the field that I had to go back to school. So in my 30s, I went back up my degree in landscape architecture, and the rest is history. I'm very practical. I've been doing it long enough that just throwing in flowers for the sake of flowers or color for the sake of color I don't think is enough. I think it's a really important end product in a garden, but there's so many other levels for plants as well as just making space for people. So I have a kind of acronym, BUS. Gardens need to be beautiful, they need to be useful, and they have to be sustainable, and everything needs to fit into that. Almost all the projects that I do are residential, and most of those are gardens that have already been there for years. So I'm the guy who comes in when somebody's finally so fed up with their garden, and the guys from Publishers Clearinghouse have come up, so they've got the big check and they're ready to do something. So it's very easy to use that as a lesson to, in a way, it's almost like being a forensic landscape architect. You have to try to figure out what went wrong, why they're not satisfied with it. And often the plants are just sitting there as perfect examples on why this didn't work here. And sometimes it's just horticultural. It's hard to figure out how it was cared for, or that they had a heavy-handed gardener who just decided everything needed to be pruned into boxes, and eventually the plant just stopped putting out, or it was the wrong plant in the wrong place. It wasn't the right size plant, so it's just been cramped, or growing in too much shade, so it's subject to disease. So that's an opening to educate people that every plant is unique, that there's certain growing conditions that have to be met if it's going to do all the things you want it to do. It's not going to have beautiful flowers if it's dead. So I've always thought that if somebody put me on an MRI and scanned my brain while I was designing a landscape and while I was drumming, the same areas would be firing, because it's problem solving. When you're playing music, at least if it's improvisational or that sort of thing, you're figuring out where to be, where you fit in, etc. And there's similarities in the design process, because you're problem solving, you're responding to what's out there, and you're trying to come up with creative solutions. So same thing with writing. When I write, it's still kind of a problem solving. And it may just be the way I'm wired, but I have this very practical sense. I tell people I'm half Vulcan, like Mr. Spock. So I don't get really emotional about plants per se. I'm not somebody who walks into a nursery and just, you have to put the blood pressure cuff on and get the defibrillator out. So it's less about that than the final product. The idea that when you look at people who photograph plants, some of them stand back and they photograph composition. And that's what's important to me, as opposed to this plant. The analogy I like to use is it's like cooking. You could like a certain ingredient, but if you don't know what to combine it with to turn it into a meal, that's really where you want to go. Same thing with music. You've got all these different components, different instruments, different places you can be. So I think there's a lot of similarities between the two. And if you have a creative mind, it's just a matter of finding all the opportunities that are there. I was going to give a talk on how to fall in love with your garden again. And it was all based on, like, I was a marriage counselor, how to heal the relationship. First line was, how many of you can walk out into your backyard and say with a straight face, I meant to do this? And there's this long silence, And then the laughter breaks out and one or two people raise their hand. Because if you are all about plants and you're just passionate, and every time you go to the nursery, they greet you by your credit card number because you're there so often. It's fine to just love plants, put them in your garden, make them grow and say, look what I did. I got this thing to grow. It's got flowers on it. I'm fine with that if somebody's just, and I don't mean merely, I mean if somebody is solely into making plants grow, that's great. But if you aspire to also having a put together look, that's where design comes in. So I think you can have both, and it's up to individuals to figure out what that balance is. If you're happy with your garden when you walk out and it looks like all the plants were just thrown off the back of the truck and planted where they fell, and that gives you joy, that's great. It's not enough for me. So drop my wife off at work, and I've got my camera in the car, and I'm going to go into a new neighborhood to see if there's any crimes against horticulture that I can, get on camera. And I'm driving through this neighborhood I hadn't been in before, and I'm driving past older guy, not in great shape, sort of like me, and he's on his bike sort of huffing and puffing up the hill, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, good for him, good guy, he's out there trying to do it. I drive a little further, and I look off to my left, and I lock up the brakes and pull over. Here's Loropetalum, which could be this beautiful, open, sort of flowing, soft plant. It's almost got the personality of a miniature Japanese maple. I think of it that way. Beautiful foliage, beautiful flowers, and he's got them planted right along the edge of the curb in a straight row, growing this high, this wide, and cut like a Quonset hut. They look like loaves of bread. Each one was about a foot tall, a foot wide, with 2 feet between them, like the top of a parapet wall of a castle. And I'm ready to take my photograph, and I get out of the car. I put on the brakes. It was good. Put on the brakes, got out of the car. I'm kneeling down, getting ready to take my first shot. And who pulls into the driveway but my buddy on the bicycle? And here's somebody about to take a photograph of his garden, and he's beaming with pride. And he says, "What do you think?" And I'm not going to lie to the guy. And I just look at him. I said, "This is really interesting." And I was able to say it sincerely. And that was it. That was enough for him. He went in the garage, and I started photographing away. But it's one of my classic moments.